Starting out with Java can be daunting if you don't know what's on the road ahead. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the different levels of competency you acquire as you go from beginner to expert. Coming up.
Java Easy. News, tutorials, tips. Everything you need to know as a beginner Java developer.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Just before we get into this, if you're completely new to Java and you haven't yet grabbed your Java Beginner Starter Kit, which is available on our website, just hop along over there. It's javaeasily.com on the homepage and you'll be able to grab it and download it from there. It's completely free and it's designed for complete and total absolute beginners, a super helpful guide. It's just really going to help you get up and running with Java programming really quickly. Okay, let's get back into the show then. So this episode is really about the 3 different levels of learning Java that I can see, or levels of kind of competency that we go through as Java developers. And I think it's nice, if you think about it, when you have so many things, different aspects that you have to learn when you're new to a particular programming platform. So you've got to learn, the platform, the language, the libraries, associated frameworks you've got, technology, architectural pieces, things like databases, messaging, that kind of thing. When you've got all this kind of like grab bag of stuff that you have to know, right? I think it's nice if you can somehow distill that down and kind of like view it through the lens of different levels of learning that you go through. This might seem kind of a bit abstract, but it'll become clear as we go on. But that's what we're going to cover in these episodes. Basically, I think there are 3 levels of learning Java, or 3 levels of competency that you have when you go from being a beginner in Java to being pretty expert in Java. And we're going to see what these are in this episode. So what are these 3 levels then? Well, we start off at level 1, and this is really where you're learning Java, the language, okay? So you're not doing much more than that at this point at level 1. You're just learning Java, the language, and you're in an IDE. So because you're in an IDE, you're kind of in a safe zone, if you like. You're not interacting with anything outside. It's just you and the code inside an IDE. It's a bit like being in a boxing ring or a dojo where you're sparring with just one thing. You don't have to think about anything else. You've no environment issues to think about, no other architectural pieces to think about. Maybe you've got a file or something you're trying to read or create or whatever. But in general, it's just you and the code inside the IDE. Okay? And this is nice in this level 1 kind of level. Well, yeah, nice in this kind of level 1 zone, if you like. Because basically, you're just in the IDE. It's nice, it's comfortable, it allows you to focus on purely the language itself, right? So you don't have to get distracted by anything else. It's just basically you and Java inside the IDE. And, hopefully while you go through this kind of level 1 phase of learning just the Java language, you should hopefully be able to learn it at a relatively deep, or at least not so superficial level. So level 1, you're in an IDE, you're seeing compilation errors, getting fixes suggested by the IDE. You can step through the code in a debugger, really brings the code to life, setting breakpoints, inspecting variables, seeing the stack frames, all that kind of good stuff. And all this kind of brings the language to life and it adds color to your learning. It's almost kind of like, when you have the difference between like black and white television or color TV. When you read about Java in books, that's like, black and white TV or something. But then if you can actually put the code inside an IDE and then you can step through it in a debugger and see it run, it's like bringing it to life all of a sudden. It's like, you're seeing the colors now, you start to appreciate the bigger picture. And it's kind of impossible in any other medium, really. So the IDE allows you to kind of really get into the code at that kind of level. But at this point, at level 1, all your time has been spent learning Java, stepping through code, and just really focusing on the Java language, okay? And it's been nice, it's been comfortable, it's been a great way to get you going as a Java developer. But of course, the downside of this is that you've only ever written something that you can run inside an IDE. So it only ever exists inside the IDE. And this code that you've now written, which just exists in the IDE, it needs to somehow break free. We've got to break out of this insular environment of just being in the IDE. So how do we break out from that? Well, then we get on to level 2. Level 2, in my opinion, is really where we're going outside the IDE and even outside core Java itself. So we're not just focusing on the syntax of core Java, but then we're also jumping out to enterprise stuff, okay? So this is really about 2 things. It's about adding libraries into your projects to access enterprise resources, getting used to those resources. There might be databases, queues, those kind of things. So now at level 2, because we're outside of the IDE, first and foremost, and also because we're now in an enterprise development style of doing things, right, we're dealing with things that are much more than just core Java. It's not just like the syntax and the Java platform itself we're having to think about. We're now having to think about these other things that we have to interact with. So these are the pieces of the technical architecture in an organization, for example, that you'll have to deal with. So it's more than Java at this point. We've got other languages in play as well. We've got SQL, for example, which is structured query language, to enable us to be able to interact with databases. We're being exposed to things like XML, like, for example, for configuration files or for doing Maven builds. We're even exposed to different build tools, as we just referenced there. So with tools like Maven or Gradle, we get different kind of communication languages or formats like JSON, for example. That's the JavaScript object notation for transmitting data between systems. We're getting used to different architectural concepts, getting to know which architectural components we have, what they do and how they interact with each other. So all of that kind of stuff, plays into this kind of level 2 landscape. But as we say, it's really about the fact that we've jumped out of the IDE and now we have to have the code being built outside the IDE, or at least not only being buildable inside the IDE, unrollable inside the IDE. So then we're introducing things like Maven and Gradle build scripts. We're having then the piece of work that you're doing, that you're working on, being deployable in an environment which is external to the IDE. So this might be the creation of like a jar file, a WAR file more commonly, or some kind of component, or maybe it's like a full system or something, which you're then deploying somewhere else. So the main point is that we're outside the IDE. As a developer, you're no longer just inside the IDE, right? But also it's not just about you and where you are in terms of the tools you're using and everything, but it's also about the actual code that you're producing, the actual end product of what you're building or what you're developing. And at level 2, it's breaking out of the IDE, and now it's a deployable unit, which is deployable to, somewhere in an organization. That might be in some kind of, cloud service, or it might be on some web server or whatever it might be. But now we're being exposed to different things, okay? We're being exposed to things like account permissions, application users, that kind of thing, how to get an application to run inside its own environment now, completely outside the IDE. It's finally made it out there. You've, in addition, learned a ton along the way, which is also a win-win during this kind of level 2 journey. And at this point, you're familiar with enterprise development, so frameworks such as Spring, Spring Boot, Hibernate, that kind of thing, JPA. You're familiar with all of the technologies and tools around that, so databases, messaging systems, and that kind of thing, different aspects to the technical architectures within which you're working. And we've gone from this level 1 insular, we're just inside the IDE, it's just about Java, to level 2, it's about enterprise development, it's about having deployable units which we can deploy inside a bigger technical architecture, if you like. And then we jump up to level 3 at that point. So what is level 3? Level 3 is basically about branching out on this enterprise development stuff, but moreover, for me, it's really about the team development side. Because if you think about it, level 1, you're inside an IDE, you're just writing core Java. Level 2, you're writing a bit of enterprise Java, and you can deploy things, or you can build things which will be deployable outside the IDE, okay? And then you're exposed to a lot more tools and technologies and everything. So you can interact with things like databases and that kind of stuff. But then level 3, really, this is like the realm of like professional developers, because at level 3, it's really about working in a team. Once you've gone through these first 2 levels, sometimes just the first level even, you're going to end up working in a team with other developers. And now it's really about the team effort that you have together. So that means you're going to get exposed and have to use things like version control systems like Git. You're going to get exposure to different processes like submitting a pull request, having code reviews. That's where somebody reviews your code, and then maybe you make changes, and then you resubmit a pull request. The pull request is like the way you submit changes to a code base to say, these are the changes I've made. It will show you all the differences between the current system or the current version which is deployed or which people are working on, the develop branch, for example, and the actual set of changes that you've made. And then because they're then centralized in this one place, in this feature branch, which the pull request is based on, we can speak about that in another episode. It's getting quite advanced now. But ultimately, your changes as a whole are presented to, somebody higher up in your team, or maybe like peers in your team or whatever, and they'll be reviewed. And then you have to go through this kind of process of like, reworking your code or working your code until everybody's happy that it does what it's supposed to do, and then you can finally merge it into the same branch that everybody else is working off of. In other words, you finally committed that piece of code. And again, that's going to have and involve concepts like branching, merging, which are used in version control systems. You're also going to be using web-based tools to see what your tasks are. So on a day-to-day basis, you're going to be using tools like Jira, for example, or Azure DevOps, so that you can track the tasks that you're doing. You can find tickets to work on. You can communicate about those tickets by commenting on those tasks. Those comments can be viewable by project managers or Scrum Masters. Scrum Masters can then also, and project managers can get an overview of how the overall project is going by then pulling together some kind of like dashboard of all the different tickets distributed against all the different developers. And then, it gives kind of like a holistic view of how a project's going. So at level 3, you're really kind of in this enterprise development world of working in a team, or this kind of like collaborative model. You're going to be pushing up new images of your component with each new build. It's going to be pushed up to a cloud environment. All of that stuff's probably going to happen automatically as soon as you make commits. So as soon as you commit your code, there's going to be a build server, which is going to be, building your code, running tests against it, executing that code and then deploying it into an environment which is as close as possible to the real life environment that you're ultimately going to be pushing the next release of your project onto. And then the business can regularly take a look at that particular environment and see how it's coming on a daily basis. Maybe there's like a fortnightly demo to the business of what's been done and that kind of stuff. And that's really like level 3. So level 3, you're a proper developer, you're working in a team, and you've got all these now. It's not just about, basically, we've gone from core Java to enterprise Java and the different aspects of technical architecture. Now it's more like, how do I survive in this kind of team development environment, really? Especially when there's different processes and different tools for managing the process, to contend with. And, the point here is that it can be scary and daunting at first, but, like anything, you get used to it. Whenever you ascend a level of competency with something, you ultimately get used to it. And things are only difficult, really, when you first get exposed to something. So, for example, the leap from like level 1 to level 2, it's only really difficult when you're first introduced to like, oh wow, there's a database now, and wow, I've got to learn this other thing called SQL and everything. But yeah, you become acclimated or acclimatized to that particular level once you have experience of working at that level, and then after a while you find, okay, now I can operate at level 2. It's fine. I now know how to interact with databases, messaging systems. I can deal with enterprise frameworks like Spring and Spring Boot. It's not that difficult. It's all fine. Again, level 3. It can be daunting at first having to use a version control system like Git or Subversion or whatever else, and to not know what a pull request is or how to do a pull request or what a code review involves, or these concepts of like branching, what really is branching about, what is merging about, all that kind of stuff, different types of merges. All of that can be confusing at first. But just know that wherever you are along the journey, all you need is like to just have a little bit of exposure and just to go in it with a good mindset. And then, before too long, it becomes comfortable. It's almost like, I wasn't going to say this, but it's almost like a little bit like, when you go into the sea or into a swimming pool or whatever, right? And, there's this kind of thing where like, you go in initially and it's like, it's a bit cold, it's up to your knees, it's like, this is a bit cold, and then you walk a bit further in and then like now it's up to your waist or whatever. The best thing to do, actually what I do as well, the best thing to do is basically, get under the water. As soon as you get under the water, shoulders under the water, right? It'll feel ice cold at first, but I guarantee 3 to 4 seconds, 5 seconds afterwards, everything's fine and you're comfortable, at that particular level of temperature. I'm not saying it's going to take 3, 4 or 5 seconds to get comfortable at like, level 3. I've been, doing pull requests and merges and all that kind of stuff. Of course not, it takes a lot longer than that. But the analogy still holds though, because it's basically just about, knowing that things aren't as bad as you think they are, and you can soon get used to a particular environment, right? As long as you have exposure to that environment and experience in that environment, and that really comes with time. So once you're on level 3, right, everything's kind of plain sailing there. What happens after level 3? Well, after level 3, really, just to recap the levels, level 1, core Java just inside an IDE. Level 2, enterprise Java with enterprise frameworks and different aspects of technical architectures, things like messaging systems, databases. Level 3, that plus the fact that we're working in a team now, it's about teamwork and all of the tooling that goes along with that, like version control and continuous builds, Jira, project management process and that kind of stuff. So you would imagine that once you get to level 3, that's it, you're a professional Java developer, everything's good. After level 3, really, in my opinion, it's about consolidation, right? So it's about deepening your knowledge by getting exposure to other architectures and other tech stacks. And you can get that in different ways. This is why I think it's good as well, by the way, not to just stay in one place for too long. So I'm a contractor, that is a freelance software developer. So I go from company to company and do software development. That's my day job, in addition to doing training and teaching and everything online. But really, if you can get exposure to other tech stacks, other companies, other ways of doing things and everything by either, transferring team in the same company or by jumping ship to a completely different company and everything. However you do it, it's really, really good because the more diverse environments you get exposed to, right, the better you become. Because then you find that really nothing, or rather there's no environment that you can go into then, once you've done that for quite a while, where, you're going to be thrown by things. So for example, I've probably worked in, say, 15 or 20 different companies with their, own technical architectures, their own ways of doing things, their own project management tools, their own quirky ways of doing version control, their own ideas about things, their own ways of managing projects, all that kind of stuff. And because I've worked in 15 to 20 different organizations, and most of them have done things, interestingly, in pretty radically different ways, then there's no way now that I could get another job or a new contract or whatever, and I would be surprised, or taken aback, or not be able to, fit in with or feel comfortable with an existing way which they currently do things. So it's really important, I think, to have variety in your development career and to get exposure to all these different paradigms and ways of doing things. And that's really, post level 3 is about this kind of consolidation. And you only really get that through experience at this point. It's not about then, picking up some books or courses to teach you different things, because oftentimes you can't learn things, even with the best of intentions, you can't really learn things unless you have a vested interest in being able to learn that specific thing. And that vested interest comes from, this kind of sink or swim aspect of starting in a new project with a new team, with a completely new architecture, a new way of doing things. It kind of comes with that. And that's only really what you get through experience, which is a good thing. So yeah, level 1, level 2, level 3. I won't go over them again. I think I've probably done them to death by now. But yeah, those are the different levels of Java competencies that you go through as you evolve from being a beginner Java developer up to being kind of fairly expert level Java developer who knows his stuff or her stuff and can, succeed and thrive in any project. So those are the levels you ascend through, but wherever you are on your journey, just know that it's a fun ride and always stay focused, keep optimistic, keep learning and have fun. Now that about wraps it up for this episode. Thanks for staying with me. Until next time, have a great day, happy coding, and speak soon. Bye.